Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Environmental Social Justice. I am your host, Wendy Nystrom, with my co-host, Ms. Joy Langford. Welcome back, Joy.
Hey, thank you. Greetings, everybody. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. And we welcome back Marc Berkman. He is the CEO of the Organization for Social Media Safety, a very important topic as of late. So welcome back, Marc.
Thank you so much for having me here again.
Anytime. So when we first chatted with you last time, we kind of went down the rabbit hole of the bullying and cyberbullying. Can we start with that and like the dangers of social media with respect to the bullying aspect?
Yeah, I think what people need to realize is how extensive this danger has become first. So we are seeing in our own work in schools across the country, about 40% of fifth graders are self-reporting being cyberbullied on social media, which is higher than some of the national surveys, but we have the luxury of being able to teach them what cyberbullying actually is and looks like. And that's why we think once they understand that, the numbers that we get are a little bit higher. Second, I think people, especially parents, need to be aware that the cyberbullying of today is not what we may have observed as traditional bullying when we were growing up. And so there's a bunch of research out there that shows that when you are bullying over social media, that the perpetrator has less remorse for the victims. And that's why we think that we see harassment that's significantly more severe. The messages that get sent to me on a regular basis are horrifying. Go kill yourself. You have nothing to live for. Along these lines are really horrifying. So the impact in theory for the targets of this cyberbullying and harassment is worse, both short term and long term.
Real quick, 𝑗𝒊𝒕𝒕𝒍𝒆 has now joined us. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Don't ask.
I will not ask. So, Marc, getting back to the bullying, we do know that when people hide behind a camera, hide behind a computer screen, they are much more vicious than normal. And, it actually works both ways. I mean, for me, being a strong introvert, being on camera, I'm better here than I am in real life. It's just my interactions. But it takes people to this next level of cruelty. And, Joel had brought up on their last show, body shaming and sexual harassment. How are we as adults talking to children or even other children talking to children? How can we stop this from happening, or at least educate people that this is not okay behavior?
At least part of the puzzle here, based on our observation, is the drive to get likes and shares and views on social media. And so there are certainly cases out there where middle school or high schooler will put something out to be funny, to get those likes, shares, and views. It's actually horrific cyberbullying, but they're blinded by that need to put their content out there and get the social approval. So really teaching right when children enter this world of social media, teaching about these dynamics, making them aware and mindful of it is a big piece of it. And then also teaching what we call, and I think we talked about this last time, the tactic of blocking and reporting cyberbullying and harassing content, whether you're the target or the bystander, and getting in the habit of doing that. So we're preventing, by doing that on a regular basis, especially with our bystanders, we're preventing the normalization of this content, because children are seeing it over and over again. It becomes normal to them. It's a normal way to interact. It's a normal way to get that social approval. And so by going every time and reporting the content to the platform, blocking it from your feed, you're saying to yourself, this does not conform to my values. This is not okay. I'm actually physically rejecting it. So we found that to be a really important piece to it. And then for our targets of cyberbullying, we see again and again that they're simply going to sit there and passively absorb the harm. It makes them feel very isolated and powerless. And so they absorb it by teaching them to go and block it, to report it, to teach them that it's okay to get help. This happens to so many kids when they're the target of cyberbullying. So go get that help. It's really hard to deal with something like cyberbullying on your own. So we're running the gamut there from preventing the perpetration, what we do with the bystanders, and how we protect the targets.
Joel?
So, I apologize. I know I ran late. Computer issues, and then coffee went down the wrong pipe, so my desk is covered in coffee. It's a very lovely start to the day, but I digress.
Happy Wednesday.
So the last time, I know TMI. So the last time we spoke, the day we spoke, Meta actually announced that they are going to reallow the twice impeached former president back online, who was kind of like the bully in chief. Let's just be perfectly blunt about this. Since that's also happened, there was a news article that came out about, it was in a school, some kids went up and they beat up another kid, and they started by videotaping saying this is going to happen. It went viral. I don't know if it went viral, but it was seen by a lot of people. The person who was beat up actually committed suicide a couple of days later. So I'm not trying to tie all these things in together, but what I do have a question for you is, like, where is the responsibility on the social media company? Like, to allow these people back online who are known for spewing hatred and vile things, where does the responsibility lie for them? Because we can talk to kids and we can talk to everybody, report it, this isn't reality, blah, blah, blah. When does the responsibility start going on to them for what they allow to happen?
That's good.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's really important that you brought up that horrifying case in New Jersey.
Disgusting.
It's disgusting. It began with elements that were the reason for the Organization for Social Media Safety's founding. Social media motivated violence, the filming of attacks. I just talked about the concept of normalization. We have found that about 85% of fifth graders are seeing explicit real life violence on a regular basis. Yeah. That has harm, that is damage to it. And so, leading into your broader point of accountability, I was on Capitol Hill yesterday in DC at a Senate hearing on these issues with a number of mothers who are survivors, whose children, really went through the worst possible tragedy when it came to social media. A big push here, and social media companies are not advertising this, of course, but big push is making sure that the public understands how widespread and severe these harms are. Right. And so you can read as a parent that case in New Jersey and think, that's horrible, not going to happen to my kid, not my kid. Whether or not, a cyberbullying case over social media ends in suicide, the frequency of that harm, as I just mentioned, is extensive, or the frequency of cyberbullying in general is extensive. Those harms from anxiety, depression, eating disorders, those are millions of children being impacted. Not all of these end in the worst case scenario. A lot do, and it's horrifying. We need to stop those. But the extent of the harm is massive.
If even one ends in that way, it's too much.
One is too much. But what the parents need to realize too, all those parents that are saying, not my child, their child in some way, it's not 100%, but in some way, most likely their child is, if they're on social media, is exposed to some level of harm here. And
where's the psychological help for young people? Well, there needs to be more psychological help for people of all ages, actually. But when you're dealing with social media and the problems that come along with it, there needs to be some sort of psychological component, psychiatric component brought into play as well.
We're working on that to increase those resources as part of the legislation. One of the pieces of legislation that we're working on this year to make sure that there's sufficient mental health resources for children going through a variety of social media related harms that they're not currently getting. I think the question of accountability for social media platforms is an incredibly important one. It's one of the essential ingredients here. I think the nice thing for me to report right now is that at the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing yesterday, there was really unanimity among the senators across parties that something needs to be done to hold the platforms accountable. The Kids Online Safety Act, which is legislation that we have endorsed, would be a big step in that direction. But that's not a complete solution. That's an essential piece of the puzzle, and we need to pass that bill. It's not a complete solution, because when the Organization for Social Media Safety takes a look at this, and in our work across the country, we keep coming to the conclusion, we need more research, we come to the conclusion that it's very likely that these platforms are inherently dangerous. And so as much accountability as the platforms can take, the products themselves, with design improvements and more content moderation and enhanced trust and safety, the products themselves are dangerous. And so that's why we focus on this three-part approach of education to students, parents, and educators, technology, so improving the safety tools that are out there, and the advocacy piece as well.
Can I just jump in real quick? One of the things that, tying in with what Joel was talking about, we were talking about, we are seeing a lot of violence being normalized. So we're seeing violence on social media, violence in video games. And I remember 20 years ago when people brought up that violence is detrimental on TV shows and video games. And I thought, oh, these people are overreacting. I don't think that's really the case anymore. I think we've normalized and almost praised violence, whether it's with your fists or with a weapon. And that's why we're seeing all of these mass shootings, all of these people getting hurt, beaten up while filming it, because they want the social media attention or notoriety. Is that being addressed as well? I know we're, report what you see if you report something wrong. We're going to get into some more interesting details later, not just bullying. But how do we get people to realize this isn't normal? You can't be desensitized.
I mean, social media is a big piece of that equation you were just talking about, but it's a complicated social issue. There's a lot of causes to what we're seeing out in the world today. I mean, empathy is trending down. This violence is trending, and certainly a big piece of that, like I said, is social media. So again, kind of our three-part approach. We have passed the legislation, Jordan's Law, in California to deal with social media motivated violence. Our impact in K through 12 schools across the country is substantial. The way that we teach is so that students can really understand. One of the most effective ways to change behavior is to show children how they might be being manipulated by authority figures. So to show them how those algorithms work, why they're front loading violence, how likes and shares and views and the need to get them is motivating that behavior. So pushing mindfulness on those issues does change behavior and spread awareness on this. And then the technology piece as well. Again, these three parts working together, improving third-party safety software and making sure that it's more accessible to families so that families can make their own choices when it comes to content. That's our hope down the road, so that essentially you're not relying on the platform to block things out. You can do it yourself and say, I don't want to see the violence come across my social media account or my child's social media account. So that's another big piece of it. So there's a lot of causes and a lot of solutions, and on the solutions part that we need to act with urgency and research more as well to better understand what's going on.
Oh, absolutely. Joel, did you want to?
No, I'm just.
No. Okay, because I wanted to, because we spent a lot of time on cyberbullying, but equally important, we talked briefly about sexual harassment, trafficking, and drugs, and how these are actually being marketed and sold through social media, which I, as a dummy, had no idea this was happening. So could you just kind of explain as easily as possible what that means?
Yeah, on the drugs piece, this is a danger. Part of our mission is to get out in front of dangers as they evolve, and they're continually evolving. We have new dangers emerging. So this is really a newer danger. When we started, there was no evidence that this was happening on a widespread scale. Over the course of the pandemic, it really exploded. So right at pre-pandemic, there was one study done that found about a quarter of young people were seeing illicit drugs advertised on social media. In our observation, so there hasn't been a recent study done on this, but in our observation, that number has grown significantly over the course of the pandemic. So now, basically drugs are readily available to any child that wants to get them on social. And I'll tell the story really briefly of Dr. Laura Berman's son. She's one of our board members. You may have seen her on TV. She's a nationally renowned
Very popular
therapist. Her son, Sammy, 16 years old, was at home during the pandemic, like the rest of us. Went on to a social media platform, connected with a drug dealer, got a drug menu, ordered what he thought was Xanax. It got delivered to his house, basically like a pizza. It turned out to be poisoned with fentanyl, and tragically, he passed away. And just so people listening know that when we have informally tested this process, we could connect with a drug dealer on social media in about 3 minutes and get one of these drug menus. So
Yeah.
the level of accessibility and convenience is like nothing that we've ever seen before.
Okay.
I'm in loss. There's a lot that was said there.
What the hell is a drug menu? And like, how is this stuff being sent around to people? I mean, is it?
kids know kids, and people know people.
I'm just amazed by this, but
It's not, well, that's the thing. It's not people that they know. You're able to search for and find drug dealers on social media that you have no connection to very quickly.
Can we out these guys? Like publicly shame them?
They operate under usernames and profiles and IDs. So in most of these cases, when the child actually dies because of a fentanyl poisoning, there's no arrest made. There's no justice being done. So in my work with these, there's so many of these families, by the way, that have been impacted. And yeah, I mean, they'll all say that the person who sold the deadly drugs to their child is not arrested at the end of the day. So it's kind of, they're operating with a bit of impunity.
I remember the last time we spoke, we actually talked about this briefly as well. And I remember, I think Wendy and I, we actually got on the phone afterwards because I turned on the news and all of a sudden I'm seeing this exact subject on the news for the first time, which I'm like going, wow, we're ahead of the curve. Whatever. Not a curve I want to be ahead of, but that's another point. So I think it was just kind of like, that was the first time I heard about it or saw it on like a major news network or broadcast, that this was actually happening, that they're researching the fentanyl sales that are happening on the social media platforms. And I was like, okay, the word is finally getting out there. This is fantastic. Now what? Because I haven't heard of it since.
Neither have I.
It's still happening. I'll say that it's still happening. So, that's why we are pushing Sammy's Law in Congress and at the state level. That would give parents a choice to be able to use third-party safety software. I think I spoke about that briefly last time, but that extra bit of deterrence is important for children like Sammy. We're pushing legislation called the Chats Act at the federal level. That would give us some insight into crimes that are associated with specific social media platforms. Right now, when there's a crime that happens in the data reporting, the law enforcement officer just checks the box and says internet. That doesn't help us anymore because this is a virtual world, just like physical addresses that do get reported when crimes happen. So we need to see, because all the platforms will get out there and say, we're doing A, B, and C to stop this. We don't have a bird's eye view to see how the numbers are changing. We just know that the cases keep coming. So, going back to your earlier point, Joel, on accountability, that's a big piece of it, so that we can say, what you're doing is not working. You need to do more, or your platform is insufficiently safe for children at the end of the day.
I mean, there's one platform out there that I think has been in the news for the past few months, and we all know that one. And their whole department for monitoring online content has been drastically cut. And so I think everybody's been watching just the hate speech and everything else that's popping up there. And this really does come down to the accountability issue that we keep talking about. It's like, if a company is setting this up to not be monitored, are they accountable for the stuff that they're allowing to go through there? Because I get that these are privately owned companies. I understand all that. You're setting it up. You've created this platform. You've created this system, and you're not monitoring it. I mean, I get this whole, we're going to hide behind freedom of speech. BS, whatever. That is complete BS. When you're allowing hatred and violence and an access to, potentially fentanyl or deadly drugs, that's not protected by freedom of speech. That's basically saying, okay, we're going to open up the door. Here's your pathway to everything. And at what point do they get held accountable for that?
I mean, that's a big piece. It's a big piece of the Kids Online Safety Act that would set up what's called a duty of care, so that platforms would be held accountable at some level for certain harms impacting children. There's an ongoing debate over what's called Section 230 in the federal law. Current federal law basically immunizes social media platforms from any of this liability when it comes to content coming across their platform. So even just yesterday in the Senate Judiciary Committee, senators were talking about the needed reforms to Section 230 so that there is some level of accountability. Because you're right, in the current legal environment, platforms, and many of the top ones have done so in the past year or so, have gutted their trust and safety staff. That's the staff that's keeping our children safe at the end of the day. It's the only part of the platform, in theory, that is, and whose job is specifically tasked with doing so. They're gutting those because it doesn't affect their revenue and bottom line, in theory. And so that legal accountability is a necessary agreement. But even before we talk about accountability for content that might be flowing through the platform, we're also looking at accountability for specific features and design choices that are harming children. And research, of course, is catching up. To be clear, let me caveat that. But platforms that allow self-deleting messages for young teens, platforms that allow anonymous chatting among young teens, algorithms designed to keep children coming back to the platform again and again and staying on for multiple hours a day. We believe that all of these design choices, which has nothing to do with content and should have nothing to do with Section 230, those are harming children, and the platforms have yet to be held accountable for the harms caused by any of those choices at that design level.
And what's even more terrifying is the fact that, we're trying to protect the kids now, but, we talked about it before. This technology is still relatively new. We don't even know what the long-term ramifications on somebody's psyche are going to be. Like, we all grew up bullied to some degree. We just were. But it wasn't placed online where it stays for generations.
And seen by everybody.
Exactly. So we don't.
Following you home is the big point there.
Yeah.
No safe refuge anymore. If you got bullied at school when we grew up, you went home. It was a safe place for most children. It follows you home. It follows kids to different schools.
It follows you to the store. You don't know. And the thing is, you're 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. You're figuring out your point in life. Imagine what it's going to be 15, 20 years later when this has been following you throughout your entire life.
Long-term.
What is this going to do to people? And that's the part that I think is it's even scarier to think about, is the long-term ramifications.
What's really scary to us, the long-term ramifications on a number of harms. What's really scary, because again, I want parents who are listening now to understand the frequency of the exposure here. And so we're finding, on average, starting in the 5th grade, about 4 to 5 hours of daily use of social media. And that's going up year on year, 4 to 5 hours. And so what we don't know right now is what that's doing short term to mental health. There's some studies out there that show correlations between that level of use and anxiety and suicidality. 4 to 5 hours plus, and by the way, there's a big chunk that's 7 hours plus we're seeing on a regular basis. What are they swapping out on a regular basis? What are these children swapping out? Direct socialization, reading, playing outside, exercise. What does that mean long term? We have no clue, but I can guess that it's probably not good.
Definitely not good. I mean, when we talked about, when you talked about parental blocks and choosing what your child sees, so my nephews were quite capable of working around that. When my sister put, she's like, there's certain TV shows she didn't want them to watch. And she put the blocks on, and they found it online because they showed me, like, look, I found it. I'm like, dude, why are you bringing me into this? And it was, it was a TV show that for adults, not a big deal, but for a 7-year-old, there was some content she didn't want them hearing about. And if they're that capable of working around it, I mean, we're putting all the responsibility on the parents to constantly monitor and constantly traffic and constantly figure this out, when it should be back on the social media platforms and the content creators, which I don't know how you do, to basically say, this is not okay anymore, and just stop it.
I hear that argument a bit. So I would say a few things. Accountability is essential. Accountability, responsibility from the social media platforms is essential. But I go back to the fact that there's some inherent danger in these platforms. So even if we can crank up the knob on accountability, which is still an open question, we're all working on it in this space, there's still dangers that are going to flow through to children. And so that tech block is a big piece. And generally we find it does work. The companies that we trust, they do work up to a certain age. And then yes, at some point, children will find ways around it at home, whether that's hacking, they will get exposure through friends, they go on play dates and sleepovers and hang out, depending on how old they are, the term, and they get that exposure there. That's why we also teach parents, I mean, it's a holistic approach, a multi-channel approach here to safety. And so we teach parents they need to have the social media safety conversations with their children. Children need to understand why these things are dangerous, why parents are blocking them, what they can do. Children don't want to be harmed at the end of the day. And there are multiple choices on social media, and they can make the right choice often if they have sufficient information. So those conversations get more and more important as children get older, and the tech gets less important as they get older. And then your social media safety rules are a big piece of this puzzle, as well as parents making sure that you have clear, preferably written down rules that you want your child to follow in every circumstance when they're on social media, if they come across a given situation. And if they violate those rules, they need a consequence, and we say the consequence should be proportional to the severity of the infraction and related to the type of misbehavior. That's kind of best practice for parents and consequences. In the world of social media, that's really easy in terms of making it related. You take away the social media if they violate that rule. If you do that consistently when they violate it, it actually is a very effective piece here, intervention here, so that the rules, which are safety rules, and the kids know why they're there, so that they're respected over time. So it's all of these pieces of the puzzle that we need. There's no one kind of magic piece to this.
No, it's multifaceted. There's no doubt about that. But talking about responsibility, accountability, all of that. But I do want to finish out real quick about how this is actually an addiction, and that people's short-term memory and recall have been severely damaged by social media, because it's a constant fear of missing out. I want to see the next thing. I want to see the next thing, rapid fire. Even our show is 30 minutes, because after that, nobody watches, because they lose, people cannot pay attention longer than that. So how do we break an addictive cycle that is geared and designed to make us addicts?
So let me talk about, very quickly, I know we're short on time, I'm going to talk about one intervention that we teach families that we really like. It's called the Family Phone Time Challenge. So there's a lot of challenges out there. Some are dangerous. Some, the Ice Bucket Challenge was great for philanthropy. But here's a healthy challenge for families. So you put an old school paper calendar up in a well-trafficked area in your house. They do still make the paper ones, I promise. Kitchen's a great place for this. And then every day for a week, you go with your family, with your children, and you can go onto your phones on Screen Time for Apple, Wellbeing for Android, and you can actually see how long you were on your phone for. You can see how long you were on social media for. And we want you just to write that number in the calendar for a week. And you're going to get your baseline. And you're all going to be horrified about how much you're on your devices. What happens?
Yeah.
100% of the time, we're all horrified. No one realizes how long they're on for. Once we show the numbers, it's a different story. So you get your baseline, and then after that, you keep doing this. So you're setting up a good habit, and you're gamifying with your family, getting those numbers down. And so what we're doing here, we stole this from borrowed it from the science of weight loss. And so we're setting up a visual regular feedback mechanism for all of the members of your family. We find again and again, kids don't want to be on for 6 hours a day. It's just the features of the platforms put us in a zombie-like state. And so getting that feedback on a regular basis helps them take a little bit of control back from the platforms and better self-regulate their time. And then gamifying it is much better, as we all know as parents, than trying to yank it out of their hands, have a screaming match, setting up a reward for getting it under a certain time. That's a really effective way to motivate our children. And then, last ditch too, we recommend to all parents to set up at least a baseline level control in your child's devices and apps for the time.
That's
now I have to ask you really quick, because I know we are running out of time, so this just popped in my head. But so like, how would this work when you're telling your kids to get off the phone, but the parents have to be on their phones all the time due to work? How does that work?
Do as I say, not as I do.
I mean, modeling is important, but I understand because I'm on my phone a lot for work. And so making clear what you're using it for. Intentionality of use is a big piece here to educate children on. There's a huge difference between texting back and forth with a member of Congress to do my job and scrolling through TikTok. And so how we're using it is a piece of this. There's a difference between the child watching, a NASA video on YouTube and, a video of a cat falling down the stairs. There's, intentionality is a big piece of this.
Yeah. Because I'm just imagining every kid going, oh, but Dad, you're on your phone.
But he's talking to Congress. That's a little different.
There you are.
Yeah.
It's like all of a sudden, everything I do online, I'm like, I'm not talking to Congress.
That was just the example from yesterday. So it varies.
My ego just dropped a little bit. But no. Marc, thank you so much for coming back. As always, you're welcome anytime you want to talk about the dangers of social media and how people can live a better life. Kids, go outside. It's great outside. I had a great childhood living in trees, basically. So, Marc, thank you so much. What?
Parents, go outside with your kids.
Yeah. I would play catch with my dad, and I'd do gardening with my mom. But most of the time, I would just run outside, climb a tree, and hang out there for like 8 hours. But
that's great.
I grew up in Michigan, folks. We didn't have a whole lot going on. So thank you, Marc, CEO of the Organization for Social Media Safety. We thank you for coming back.
Yes.
I'm Wendy Nystrom, your host with Environmental Social Justice, with my co-hosts, Miss Joy Langford and 𝑗𝒊𝒏𝒈. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We will see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye now.